Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on pension plans and their evolving journeys as they work towards improving their funded statuses. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're delighted that you carved out time in your schedule to be here. My name is Megan Yost, and I am a Senior Vice President at Siegel, responsible for thought leadership and insights. And I'm joined today by two of my expert colleagues, Jonathan Price, a Senior Vice President and our retirement practice leader, and Ryan Sherman, a Senior Vice President and Senior Consultant in Siegel Marco Advisors, our investment consulting practice. Thank you both for joining me today. So without further ado, let's dive into our conversation now. And this is a first in a series of webinars on the topic of meaningful retirement income, which is our philosophy and a framework that we believe at Siegel and Siegel Marco Advisors is how retirement programs should be designed, in that they should provide income to their members or participants when they reach retirement that they can live on for the rest of their lives. We believe this framework that all retirement programs this framework should work for all types of retirement programs, and that there's components of helping plans provide meaningful retirement income. And that is that the contributions are stable and secure, and that the stakeholders and the members or the participants understand and appreciate those benefits that they will eventually receive. So let's start our discussion here. And Jonathan, perhaps you can open up our conversation by setting the stage for everyone tuning in today about why it is that so many plans, pension plans, are now in this position that they've improved their funded status in recent years. Can you explain what's happening?
Sure. Good afternoon, Megan, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone who's attending. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking about pension plans and their improving funded status. And to your point, Megan, there has been an evolution in funded status over the last decade or even decades. Before jumping into that, I do want to comment that it's important to contextualize. We're having this conversation thinking about really the full expanse of the marketplace. So we're thinking about both public and private sector, multi and single employer plans, pension plans across the continuum in North America. We're really thinking about what are the trends that we've seen that have brought us to where we are today, and where can we go looking forward. And again, with that as background, this slide is a great way to really introduce the conversation, because plans really are focused on meaningful income. That is their purpose. But to deliver on that requires the stability and the understanding. And over the last number of years, we lived through first the dot-com bubble, then the great financial crisis, and then it continued interest rates going down. All of those things put lots of pressure on the plan, which required lots of, I would say, understanding of stakeholders. And the reason why that's the case is because a lot of hard work was required over the last decade or two that has occurred really since those events. Think of when I say hard work, I mean dedicated contribution rates and putting aside money into the plan, maybe at a higher rate than what had previously been anticipated, difficult decisions around benefit levels. And so there has been a lot of hard work, and that has required all of the stakeholders of the plans to make that work. And all of that, of course, is towards that perspective of having a stable benefits program that is affordable. The contributions ultimately do become stable, and the benefit levels are stable and they're secure. So all of this kind of ties in together. What we've seen nicely over the last number of years, and I'm going to turn over maybe to Ryan to talk about some more, is the capital markets, which really they hurt during the dot-com bubble and the great financial crisis and interest rates going down. Maybe we've seen some improvement over the last number of years that has really helped to get us to where we've been, in addition, again, to the slowing of the growth of the benefits and the increase of the contributions that we've seen over this period of time.
Ryan, do you want to share a little bit about how the capital markets have played a role in plan sponsors improving their funded statuses in recent years?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Megan. So I would say this chart really shows the two main reasons for the improvement in funded status. First and foremost, we have the S&P 500, which is U.S. large cap equities, have had a tremendous run over the last decade. You can see that 10-year return, almost 15% per year annualized. And more importantly, the last 3 years, 23% per year on average is what the S&P returned, much higher than expectations. Just to put in context, our capital market assumptions are about 7% for the S&P, but we've seen a really strong market driven the last few years by the AI craze and the Mag 7 and the tech industry. So that obviously has put upward pressure on asset prices. And the second component that we overlay on this chart is our interest rates. So back in 2022, when we had high inflation, the Fed raised rates and interest rates spiked, as you can see, which put downward pressure on a lot of plans' liabilities. So with liabilities coming down, assets going up, that really created a much higher funded status for many plans.
Great, thanks. So if we think about this backdrop in terms of how it's helped plan sponsors improve their funding status, Jonathan, can you contextualize for us how many, like the scope of plans in the US today that have seen or benefited from this rising tide, if you will?
Sure. And before jumping into the answer, just want to comment, if you want to take a screenshot, take a picture of the QR code on the right, on the left-hand side, that'll take you to our retirement insights on Siegel Co. on Siegel's website. Two of our periodicals that we produce give some insight into the question that you're alluding to, Megan, and we've got some thumbnail pictures of those articles on the page. The first is PRISM, and PRISM is Siegel's quarterly report of a sample single employer plan, and we've been producing PRISM for years and years. And when we go back to that 10-year period that Ryan was alluding to on the prior slide, back then the PRISM pension plan was roughly 80% funded. Today, at the most recent measure, it's 109% funded. So we're talking about a 29 percentage point improvement during that period of time. Again, for all the reasons that we were talking about before, the capital markets, benefits, contributions, and the like, but 29 percentage point increase. Similarly, Siegel's most recent calendar year multi-employer zone survey showed 76% of plans are in the green zone. For those not familiar with the color coding of multi-employer plans, simply that means that they're well funded. In fact, the average funded percentage was 105 to 106%, whereas a decade prior, the average funded percentage in that same survey was 87 to 88%. Again, meaningful improvement during that same time period. Lastly, in the public sector, over the same time period, boards have been addressing measuring pension obligation changes in the mortality tables and more conservative economic assumptions, including the impactful change of lowering the rate of return assumption. Collectively, these changes have increased the measure of the liability, and it's important to realize across the board, our industry as a whole, sponsors and consultants have really improved our abilities to measure these obligations. And in spite of these improvements, which really have increased the liabilities for public sector plans, funded status has still improved 5 or 6 percentage points, at least as reflected in NASRA's annual survey. So what we're seeing is across the board, funded statuses have improved. That doesn't mean it's improved for every single plan. It's really important to realize that each plan is its own set of facts and circumstances. But as a general trend, we have definitely seen plans, again, through increased contributions, perhaps the slower growth or even the freeze of benefits, or in the capital markets, collectively, we have seen funded statuses that are better than they were a decade ago. So that has definitely been that positive change.
So it sounds like if a lot of plans have done the work and the markets have helped accelerate them into a healthier position, in most cases, mm-hmm. We're probably at an inflection point then for these plans in terms of they've had some certain goals and objectives and a North Star that they've been working towards. So now that they're here, what now? What next? How should they be thinking about this moment and going forward and managing and overseeing their plans?
Sure. So the key word that comes up over and over again, and I would think about and really stress, is intentionality. And what I mean by that is, we have so many plans across public and private sector, single employer, that have really had to work so hard they had 80 cents of asset for every dollar of liability for so many years, and really climbed up that hill, worked really hard. And really the North Star was getting fully funded, getting to 100 cents on the dollar, if you will. And now that we're there, then maybe the natural emotion might be to just exhale, and that's so understandable. But now's an opportunity to really reset our goals and say, what do we want our plan to be doing for ourselves, for our membership, for our participants, for our key stakeholders going forward? Now's the opportunity to be really intentional about what our objectives are. And I will say this, we've seen clients where sometimes those objectives are going to be improving the benefits that were worn away during this time period. And for some of it, it's going to be toggling more risk into the plan, more conservatism into the portfolio, and even into the benefits. And some, it's a blend of the two. And for some, it's really just, let's continue to grow our surplus till we know more of what we want to do, or let's hibernate, or let's slow down until we do craft that new pathway. But it's really about being intentional at this phase and not just doing what we were doing 3 years ago because we were doing it 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So, Ryan, maybe you can help us now think about, for those plans that have improved their funded status, perhaps surpassed goals that they had set for themselves, what are you seeing plans do now? Are they changing actuarial assumptions? Are they changing investment policy or asset allocation decisions? Are there consistent tools or decisions that these plans are making as they think about what to do going forward?
Sure. And that's a great question, Megan. As per Jonathan said, there's a lot of options that these plans have now that they've improved their funded status. And the goals and objectives of what you want to do on a go-forward basis, really drives with what your investment strategy should be and really what your risk budget should be. But I think one of the key similarities between plans and their objectives is it's a good time to take risk off the table, to rebalance, to reassess your portfolios. For plans that may want to terminate or preserve the funded status that they've achieved. De-risking makes a lot of sense, especially if plans have been on a glide path where they've been de-risking over time as funded status has improved. For other clients that may want to improve the benefit, you may need to take on some more risk to enhance that because you need more return. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility, and you need to determine which direction you want to go in. And I would say that, Jonathan and I work on 2 clients together that are kind of on different sides of that spectrum. One is going towards that termination mode. We've been de-risking over time. We actually de-risked 5 times over the last year as the market's been going up, and they've hit certain triggers on their glide path. And now they're determining, well, how can we match our liabilities to our assets more closely? How do we get out or not commit more to private markets and unwind those positions so they could either terminate or hibernate the plan? Whereas another client that I work on with Jonathan, it is an ongoing plan and they want to preserve the current benefits. So they did take some risk off the table, but they still need to maintain a certain amount of return generation to pay for the future benefits of that plan. But I think that the key similarity is managing risk, rebalancing, reassessing your goals. We did asset liability modeling for both plans to determine what they should be doing, and Jonathan and I work very closely on that. And each client has a different path and different asset allocation that they're going to accomplish now.
Megan, if I could just add to what Ryan is saying here, in those situations and in others, there's the investment policy and the strategy around the investments, risk on, risk off, more tightly hedging, and the like that Ryan's alluding to. There are these 2 other policies that really happen in parallel to the investment policy, and it's important to really think of these 3 together. And again, in these client situations, absolutely, this is what's happening, and hopefully it's happening across the board. The other 2 policies I'm talking about are the contribution policy and the benefits policy. And again, because in many instances, contributions have been in addition to the capital markets, have been a really important source of funding improvement over the last decade. It is important to understand what the ultimate trajectory is for contributions into the plan. There's only 2 ways to improve funded status: the market returning, improving on the assets that are already in the plan, or putting new assets in the plan. So really having a contribution policy that aligns with the investments. And the other one is benefits, making sure that we understand, are we are we ensuring that there is really meaningful income that's going to come to this the population when they're ready to retire? Is it at the appropriate level, and making sure that that benefit policy is in alignment with the assets?
So what I think I'm hearing you say, or you both say, is that being in this healthier position gives the plan sponsors more control over where they can go from here. I guess this raises a natural question for me about those plan sponsors that may have some restrictions or don't have as much flexibility in terms of perhaps their contribution policies. For example, like perhaps a public plan sponsor where the contribution policy is set by the legislature of the state or something. Can you talk about, for those types of plans in this situation, what are their options going forward?
Sure. So I'll start here. This is what I'm about to say is really true for all plans, but it's particularly true where any of those three categories, the investment policy, the contribution policy, or the benefits policy, are the purview of different stakeholders. And that is the importance of projections, the importance of modeling and really knowing what could happen before it happens. And whether it's modeling what the contribution policy and projections should look like over the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years, or it's the investment policy and how you balance to a fixed contribution number, whatever the state budget may have pre-allocated. All of those features are best addressed with, again, coming back to that other term, intentionality, and with forward-looking projections. Really, whether it's stochastic projections or a series of deterministic projections, really that's critical at this stage in the process.
So I think part of what you might be getting at here too is the ability to continue to pay the promised benefits, right? And the liquidity of the plan. Maybe Ryan, could you share a little bit more about that in terms of, especially for well-funded, mature plans, how they might address their liquidity needs going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Liquidity is paramount for those plans that don't have control over the contributions. And, we do liquidity studies for our clients a lot. So you can kind of see when you have the assets available needed to pay for the benefits. And the other part I would say is that investing more in line with your liabilities. So benefit-driven investing, especially with interest rates elevated where they are today, you could really structure a bond strategy that can have the coupons and principal payments available to pay those benefits, which will help offset some of those contributions that may not be there if you have no control over them.
If I could, I would be remiss if I didn't jump in, Ryan, in your comments. And critical to be making sure that we're on top of the risk budgets, but also important to use this as an opportunity to improve benefits and catch them up, particularly where the rates of growth of those benefits are either frozen in the past or they didn't grow as quickly as inflation. This comes back to Megan, the opening slide about those three pillars: meaningful retirement income that's stable, secure, that the key stakeholders understand and appreciate. And the meaningful income is really critical that we're coming back to that as a North Star, is what the members, the participants of the plan are going to need to retire. So important to jump in while we're going to manage the risk and come up with the liquidity sources. We're also going to hopefully find opportunities to improve benefits where appropriate.
So you both have plans that you're working with currently, and you've alluded to this already, that are well-funded, have surpassed some of their goals. Are you seeing trends in terms of certain plan sponsors taking a certain type of approach, if they have these different levers, if you will, in terms of how they may adjust or manage their plans going forward? Is there a lot of variability between plan sponsors, or are you seeing consistent tools being employed by the same types of plan sponsors going forward?
Sure. So I'll jump here in first. What's super interesting, and I'll start with the corporate market, because for years, really since the Great Financial Crisis, the chatter, if you will, in the conference community, what you hear quite often is that the moment that plans get fully funded, as soon as we reach a point where there's 103 cents for every dollar of liability in the plan, plans are going to terminate. They're going to go away. And That's not what we're seeing. What we're actually seeing is CFOs and heads of HR are taking a studious approach to their plans. And they're saying, we have this asset, we have this benefit that we promised our people. We don't need to rush into making a decision. The most important thing, if we've already frozen our plan previously, if we froze it a decade or two ago, and we've got this pension plan in our on our books and in our company, what we're going to do is let's make sure that we have the risks in place, make sure we understand what it's doing in terms of the benefit level for our people, how it's coexisting with the 401k plan. Let's start by taking stock, and said otherwise, let's start by being intentional. We've gotten to an important place in the life cycle of the plan, but let's not jump to the next step, because this is an important piece of our value proposition, an important piece of what's in our company. We're not going to rush to any kind of decisions immediately. That has actually been far and away the most common, and some are even talking about maybe we should reopen, maybe not looking exactly like it did 10 or 20 years ago. Maybe it's a variable plan, a hybrid plan, a variable annuity plan, or a cash balance, but it's going to be something that will meet the times that's appropriate for that audience. That's just an interesting little snippet of the marketplace in the corporate world that we've seen. Across the board, we really are seeing these two big levers, and I would say, coming back to how we're having this conversation, are the benefits at the appropriate level for where they should be? And do we have the appropriate levels of investment risk in the plan? Are we managing those two components appropriately? And sometimes those two go hand in hand. Again, if we think of a variable annuity plan or a hybrid plan more broadly, where sometimes the benefit levels will adjust based on market return of the plan, we bring those two parts of the conversation into one. I'll just say this really reinforces the need to have a good conversation going on between your investment consultant and your actuary, because benefits and investments really do tie in together really closely in that environment. But really, we're seeing those two components, those two levers, the benefits level and the risk and the investment level, coming together as those two real broad conversations that our clients are having pretty consistently at this stage in the conversation.
And Ryan, what about from your point of view, from an investment perspective? Is there a similar approach that plans are taking, or is there a lot of variability?
No, I think it's very similar, and I heard Jonathan say risk a lot, and that's key now. It's clients managing their risk budget. Do we want to de-risk? And that's a key theme that a lot of clients are looking at. But there are plans that may want to increase benefits, and they could be re-risking. So it's really, how much risk do you want to take with equities at all-time highs? You have to, that's a consideration. With interest rates high, that's also a consideration. So if from a de-risking standpoint, you could really get yield now on your fixed income assets that could offset some of those potential equity challenges on a go-forward basis.
Brian, one of the things you alluded to earlier on was around liquidity. In fact, I think you also alluded to some of the private asset classes that clients have used over the last number of years to kind of squeeze out, if you will, maximize returns and in the various asset classes. How do those two pieces, for clients that have been working, or plan sponsors that have been utilizing the private asset classes to get fully funded, how does that transition work to the liquidity, to creating more liquidity now as we're reaching these more mature phases in the life cycle?
Yeah, especially when rates are really low, like let's say 10 years ago when we started this example, private markets really were a good way to enhance the overall return of your fund, but the liquidity has increased. So, sorry, the illiquidity has increased. So it's back then, 10 years ago, the life of a private equity fund, let's say it was 10 years, maybe with 2 1-year extensions. Now it's up to about 15 years. So the liquidity is less. You have to really manage your liquidity bucket and determine how much risk you want to take and how much liquidity you can afford in your portfolio, while still making sure you have enough assets to pay your beneficiaries.
Interesting.
Jonathan, I want to expand on something you said earlier about technology, and you described how plans, particularly those who may not have as many options to them available in terms of what to do going forward. Like, how has technology and how has that changed over the years, especially more recently, and enhanced the way that plans and their partners, yourselves, actuaries, can model for them the the liabilities going forward. Has that evolved and changed significantly?
Night and day, really material improvements in the ability to model. And I said before, both deterministically and stochastically. So our ability to project, the ability to analyze experience, which gives us a better starting point for making our assumption, our prospective assumptions. So our ability to analyze the past, be able to look to the future in terms of assumptions, has really improved. Mortality tables have gotten significantly more sophisticated over the last decade plus. So that's really helped, particularly as plans mature and a bigger portion of the obligation is tied to the longevity of the participants, of the members. So the mortality improvements have really been a big piece of it. The ability to visualize data. So these plans are full of thousands, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of data points and human beings. And being able to see that data and to visualize it and to be able to therefore better understand it and therefore help to understand what we can do to help control or improve it. That's a sea change as technology has improved and data visualization has improved. So yes, we've really seen a lot of improvements in our abilities to model, to project, and also for us to convey what those projections look like in terms of the visualization of the data. So yeah, it's just been a really interesting and exciting time to watch that process.
Great, thanks for sharing that. For both of you, I have one question before we start opening it up to Q&A, and that is for people listening today that perhaps manage or oversee plans that have improved their funded status, what's one thing they should keep in mind or that they should keep in top of mind for their committees as their plans continue to evolve?
I'm going to say be purposeful with your plan and risk budgets and what you're trying to accomplish. There's this right balance between a plan being stable, predictable, and being secure, being sure that the promise that we're making to the members, to the participants is a good promise, and ultimately being able to deliver that meaningful income. So be really purposeful. This is that moment in time where we can reflect back, hopefully feel accomplished with what we've done, but look forward to say, what do we want to accomplish in the next chapter?
Ryan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just add, risk budget is key, and what you're trying to accomplish in your goals is going to tie into that risk budget. And this is a good time with all the volatility that's going on in the world to kind of reassess how much risk you want to take and ultimately how that meets your future plan objectives.
Great, thank you. So we're going to open it up to questions from all of you in the audience. So please feel free to insert your question in the Q&A icon at the top of the screen. We also received a handful of questions ahead of time, so we'll start by addressing some of those. So thank you to all of you who shared your questions with us. We really appreciate it. The first question is about the best strategies for increasing benefits for plan participants and helping plan sponsors share the wealth. Ryan, do you want to take that first? And then Jonathan, if you have anything to add, do you want to include?
Yeah, so as we talked about a little bit earlier, increasing the benefits would typically tie into, potentially re-risking or making sure your return is sufficient to pay for those future benefits. So, I'm sure a lot of plans have been overweight equities and such. So maybe it's not even adding to equities, maybe just a rebalancing, but it's definitely something that you have to keep on your return generating assets to pay for those future benefits if you want to promise increase that for your plan.
And I would think about this from a slightly different angle, which is start by assessing, thinking about from the participant or member perspective, what is the appropriate level of a meaningful income that you're trying to generate out of the plan? So when we talk about the best strategy for increasing benefits, start by understanding for yourselves, what is the benefit strategy? What is the ultimate goal that you want the plan to deliver? And then tie that back into what Ryan was saying before, while being mindful that there's that third leg to the stool, which is the contribution policy. So we can't lose sight of the fact that the assets in the plan today are not necessarily going to be able to do everything. They may be able to do some of the heavy lifting going forward, but there's going to be contributions as well. And tying those three in together, that's really a strategy for doing so, with one additional wrinkle or additional factor, which is that's all around balancing the stability and the security of the program. this question, I think what we're hearing from that was submitted is also really about the stakeholders. It's about the folks who are involved in the plan sponsors, the trustees, the stakeholders, and maybe if it's a public sector, there's maybe the state and the legislative component as well, and then the members, the participants of the plan. So it's important to understand that the strategy is going to be about what do we want to accomplish, and also making sure that each of the key stakeholders understand that and appreciate what we want to get from the plan and how it's going to help the overall ecosystem around which the plan exists.
Great, thank you. We received another question about de-risking, and so this person is asking, at what point does a plan that's closed to new entrants become mature enough to begin taking less investment risk? Ryan, do you want to address that one?
Yeah, this ties into the glide path that I alluded to earlier. A lot of plans are on these glide paths. As you hit certain trigger points, you de-risk the portfolio. So obviously some key ones, once you cross 100%, you should be mostly in a fixed income type of portfolio that could help match your liabilities and help pay for those liabilities. But even at 100% funded, you may not want to have all your money in bonds. There still could be a component in risk or return generating assets. So each glide path is going to be different based on your client and what needs and what risk you ultimately want to take.
And Ryan, are there, just to follow up on that, if I may ask you, are there like objectives? I know you alluded to once you cross 100%, there's generally you're going to be trending. Are there any objective thresholds, or is it very much catered to, again, that right balance for the client and the plan?
Yeah, I would say it's the right balance for the client and the plan. Clients that may want to terminate or do a PRT are going to have to pay a premium to do that, and will likely target a much higher targeted funded status to be 105, 108%. So it really depends on your goals and objectives.
There was a question that is related to this about what are the options for plans that are really well funded. 120% was the question. How does that change your answer, Ryan?
Yeah, so I think for those types of plans, and Jonathan kind of alluded to this earlier, how much value do you have in the surplus? So some clients see a lot of value in that and they want to grow the surplus. So you could kind of hedge out a lot of your interest rate risk and have a strong BDI, benefit driven portfolio to satisfy your benefit payments, and then have a separate bucket for your surplus that you could grow and have return generating exposure.
And I'll just say, if I could just jump in here, Megan and Ryan, I think about this really from two perspectives. Number one is, are you trying to utilize that surplus within the plan? So what role does that surplus have within the plan? And then depending on the statutory environment within which the plan is operating, and that's the long-winded way of saying there's lots of complicated rules about how to use surplus assets outside of the plan. But if you're in one of those statutory environments where you can use some of the surplus assets on a very, very well-funded plan, a super well-funded plan, over 120%, say, how does that factor into your objectives? So again, maybe for a single employer plan in the private sector, maybe there's an opportunity to fund retiree medical benefits today, or maybe there's some hope from the plan sponsor that ultimately the law will change and the ability to fund other benefits will come out of the plan. So managing that surplus has additional value. It is, I would say that's where it's important to differentiate, or to start with, what's your benefit strategy? What are you trying to come up with in terms of a benefit strategy, in terms of using those assets, deploying them within the plan? Do you want to improve benefits? Do you want to continue to maintain the current benefits within the plan, or perhaps even using them outside of the plan to help for additional purposes? There's not rights or wrongs here. It's important for each plan sponsor to know what the options are and what could be best for their people on the benefit side, and then to what Ryan was saying before, how do you layer that on top of, or match that with the right investment policy, which presumably would be, to his point, fairly conservative in that environment, but again, tied to whatever those additional objectives may be.
So another question here is about capital market assumptions. So obviously the equity markets, as you have pointed out, Ryan, have really helped all plans, like rising tide lifts all boats, as they say, have helped a lot of plans get into better positions. So the question is, your slide demonstrating the equity performance of the last 10 years reminded me of the roaring 1990s, which ended badly for pension plans and their funding statuses in the 2000s. If capital market assumptions suggest low returns for equities going forward, how do pension plans prepare themselves for a more difficult investment environment going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, and what we recommend to clients is diversify your assets. I feel like portfolios in the 90s were a lot less diversified. You know, the typical 60-40 was all you had. You know, today there's all these other alternative asset classes available. There's different ways to diversify the portfolio. So you're not as reliant on that S&P 500 exposure that we saw. So if there is volatility like we're seeing today, you hopefully will have other asset classes to offset the S&P 500 risk that typically weren't in portfolios back in the 90s.
Great, thank you. Another question here is about the actuarial assumption. So, Jonathan, I'll have you address this one and how related the actual actuarial assumptions are in terms of the return on assets and the CME projected returns of the investment portfolio. Excuse me. In other words, does an increase or decrease in the actuarial assumed rate of return on assets for a given plan always results in an increase or decrease to the level of risk in the investment portfolio?
That was a mouthful. So I think what you're asking is that and I'm going to maybe just kind of jump into using Ryan's, somewhat of the components that Ryan was alluding to before. Does if our capital market assumptions going forward are more conservative or have a slower growth rate going forward compared to the past, does that directly correlate to lower assumed rates of return on the actuarial side? And I would say this: each assumption has to be looked at through the best judgment of the actuary. But typically, you would expect, as capital market assumptions project lower rates of growth going forward, you would generally expect directionally that to tie into lower actuarial assumptions. That is a general relationship that you would expect.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Another question is kind of open-ended here. It said anything specific to church plans. Jonathan, could you address for that type of plan sponsor, how to think about their goals and objectives going forward?
Sure. So I'll actually add a couple of comments on church plans that are related to this. The first one is it's for those who are not familiar. I'm just going to maybe spend 30 seconds to bring the rest of the group who are not as familiar with church plans into that part of the conversation. Church plans typically are not necessarily regulated by some of the same rules. They have a different set of rules than we may be more familiar with the typical either public or private sector plan. Many of the plan sponsors who are listening today are probably quite familiar with their sets of rules. Church plans have their own with a fair amount more flexibility. And one of the components that differs for church plans is that it's not really part of the PBGC ecosystem. So if we think of in the private sector, that is typically the case. So one of the components that we would just say in general is that it's important, as always, to be aware of the statutory environment that the plan operates and to make sure that we're managing risks. And there may be a kind of a bigger layer, a higher layer risk that church plans want to be conscious of. Another component that we've seen in some of the data in the church plan space is that some of the funded status of those plans have not necessarily recovered quite as quickly just yet and still have some more work to do to get to improve funded status during it going forward. So some of those plans may be a few years off still from this same conversation. Hopefully in a couple of years now we can have this exact same conversation with some of those church plans, but some of them are still getting there, and there's some improved funded status, but maybe not fully and not enough just yet. So those are maybe some of the things to think about from that. The other component, and I'll come back to how this all ties in, is that the benefit strategy, which may be really important for a church plan and for that population around the value proposition of working for the organization, really cuts to the heart of what the goal of the plan is there to do. The church plans often are very much central to the value proposition. They're very much in alignment with the organization's philosophy in terms of taking care of the individual who works at the institution. So that is another component which may be somewhat, maybe not different or unique, but certainly worth focusing on in the church plan environment.
Got it. Thank you. One more question here is about asset allocation decisions and how that impacts the discount rate. Jonathan, is that something you want to answer or address first?
Sure. So I'll just say it's very much market specific. We've talked a lot about how we're having this conversation across public and private sector, and as well as across single and multi-employer markets. So it's really across the board. There are going to be differences, statutory differences, and so there's not a single answer to this question, unfortunately. Megan, I will say this because we have plan sponsors who are listening from across the industry. Hopefully each of you knows the answer to this question for your marketplace, but if you don't, I ask that you to please reach out to your Siegel consultant to have this conversation, because, for instance, in the corporate market, there's really very little correlation. It's very much two distinct conversations. Multi-employer and public sector, it is much more connected. There's maybe slight nuance differences between the US and Canada. So there are nuances here, but by and large, asset allocation can affect the rate, the expected rate of return for the plan, but that has differing impacts across markets.
Great, thank you. And then for those of you listening today, before you leave our call, please take a screenshot or a photo of this QR code so that you can give us feedback on the content. And if you have any further questions that we weren't able to address, please don't hesitate to let us know. Ryan and Jonathan, I have one final question for you, and that is kind of the partnership. You've talked about this a little bit throughout your comments today, the partnership between the actuary and the investment consultant working in conjunction or together to help plans reach their goals. Can you shed some more light in terms of your views on how that should really work and how you both work together? Because I know you share clients in common.
I think that that's a big advantage that we have at Siegel, that we, we're experts at both the investment side and the actuarial liability side, and we take that holistic approach when we consult to clients. So, no one's blindsided. We go in as a team, and when we do our modeling or come up with way to help clients meet their objectives, it's a two-sided approach. You really can't just go on in with one side, focus solely on the assets or focus solely on the liabilities, because that's only one part of the goal of getting you there. So you really need both sides, and that's definitely something that we have the expertise in, and we think is an advantage of Siegel.
Yeah, it's really it's a pleasure always to be able to work with your investment consultant who really understands, and from you can have an open conversation. It is to the benefit of a plan sponsor and the participants in the plan, where the key consultants, the advisors to the plan, really understand or can communicate across these various elements. It's the investment contribution benefits policies effortlessly. So yes, absolutely, Megan.
Great, thank you. Well, again, thank you all for joining us today. If you have feedback, please don't hesitate to share it in the survey, which you can access here on the screen. Additionally, on the next slide, you'll see our contact information. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions for Jonathan, for Ryan, or myself. We would be happy to hear from you. Again, also, please, as Jonathan encouraged, reach out to your CRM, your point of contact at Siegel or Siegel Marco Advisors. We're always happy to hear from you. So thank you for taking time to join us today. And thank you, Jonathan and Ryan, for your insights and your perspective, your expertise. We're so lucky to have you at Siegel and Siegel Marco Advisors, and lucky to have you join us today. And then finally, for those of you with responsibility for health plans, we do have a webinar next month on pharmacy benefits and pharmacy benefit manager reform. There's been a lot of activity in that space, so please go to siegelco.com to find out more. We'd love to have you join our webinar on pharmacy benefits. So thanks again for everyone for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and thank you, Ryan and Jonathan.